Welcome, everyone. It is April 23rd, year 2023, Sunday, and it is 5 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And I hope you're having a wonderful end of the weekend. Hope it was very productive for you as well as relaxing. Today, we're going to get into a hidden gem of a television show. Don't get turned off by it. Wait till you hear the credentials, the bona fides of the person who wrote and produced this made for network television film. His name is Mr. David Carp. That's capital Karp. And he's new to me. As you know, I'm very much into writers, both journalists, nonfiction writers, biographers, and of course, writers of fiction, novelists, short stories. And it's always a thrill to me when I'm even at this late point, whenever I discover a writer that's new to me, I'm very excited, and I'm even more gratified to be able to share this very, very talented individual who would be in my father's generation. I think he was born in 1922, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, he was born 19. This is according to a obituary in the New York Times. Yes, he was prominent enough to merit a obit in the NYT. He was born 1922 in Manhattan, a native New Yorker. He died in 1999 of emphysema. And I think he was in Massachusetts. I guess he had left Hollywood at that point at age 77. Now, Mr. Carp, David Carp, was a novelist. He was a screenwriter in the so-called golden age of television, which I'm well acquainted with, that period of television. My mentor, Professor J. Fred McDonald, was an expert in it, and I had picked up a little bit of expertise in that area myself, having written at least two books on television that go back to when we're talking about golden age of TV, sort of 1950s, probably into the early 1960s. And then, by the end of the 60s, it was going downhill. They were providing quality. I'm talking about the networks and the advertising agency were providing quality television up until that point, until they hooked us into it. And once, just like I guess cell phones, or email or whatever it is, YouTube, once they get you hooked and you can't live without it, then the hammer drops. So this individual, I'm just going to go very briefly through his background because it's very, very important before I get into a number of clips that I'm sure you'll find exciting, drawn from the actual made for TV movie. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to show them in their entirety, but I have 6 different segments queued up for our review, just to give you an idea of the subtlety and the truth that Mr. Carp, as the writer and producer, was able to sneak through the network executives even as late as 1970. This is broadcast in 1970, long past the golden age of TV. And by that time, I'm talking about David Carp, is most likely wielding a great deal of influence in his field, and maybe was able to get his way as opposed to a younger writer who's trying to tell truth. When you're talking about golden age of TV, maybe it'll help you if I bring up the name Paddy Chayefsky, right? He's usually the person cited as being the exemplar of the golden age of TV. There are any number of people, and he was a writer and director, of course. Actors such as Marlon Brando, James Dean started at this time. Robert Redford was starting on television as well as Broadway and theater. Any number of people. So it was loaded with talent. And I would argue that, as we're going to see today, that the pipeline of talent remained full all the way to the demise of television when cable came in. And now many of us have, of course, cut the cable by this time. So he was a novelist, and I'll get to his career there in a moment. And but prior to that, as a younger man, he either was drafted or probably enlisted in the U.S. Army during World War II, we're talking about 41, right? Maybe he got in at 42 to 45. I don't know when he mustered out, but he stayed in the military, at least in the civilian slash military occupation forces in Japan after World War II. And I mention that because not only did David Carp have a huge impact on American media, American television and film and fiction, which I'll get to in a moment, but he also had an impact on the post-war development of Japanese cinema, which went through its purging of fascist, militaristic, nationalistic filmmakers and screenwriters. And of course, the regulation, the screening out of communist filmmakers in Japan. Japan had a diversity of political writers, politicized writers, and only a few were able to get in, especially in the 50s. It loosened up a little bit, but I think the United States of today has had a very, very strong hand in determining the political content in a lot of Japanese cinema. But in the 50s, particularly, I think, in fact, David Carp was one of the top guys, if not the top guy, who was responsible for censorship of Japanese cinema as part of the U.S. military occupation under General Douglas MacArthur, right, in Japan. Gosh, I wonder if you ever crossed paths with Lee Harvey Oswald over at Atsugi Air Base, right outside of Tokyo. And as you might know, the U.S. Army Signal Corps was, contrary to its belying his benign title, was involved heavily in propaganda, both black propaganda and so-called white propaganda. It had people like Frank Capra. Remember, Mr. Smith Goes to Washington. These names might not mean anything to you. Very popular in the 30s and 40s and maybe into the early 50s. Frank Capra, George Stevens. It's a period of film that's been studied extensively. My mentor at UC Irvine, Carlton Moss, was with the U.S. Army Signal Corps. He directed a propaganda film called The Negro Soldier that was put out there to convince African Americans to enlist or allow themselves to be drafted into the U.S. military, because a lot of black men in particular weren't really, they were kind of rooting for Japan because they saw Japan as another colored nation that was fighting back against European and Anglo-American imperialism, colonialism, right? The history is not really been told yet there. So Carlton Moss, who was my mentor, directed this film, which is it's a classic. I think you might be able to find it on Tubi. It's called The Negro Soldier. So, and he told me a lot of stories about the Signal Corps. He knew all these big shots that you read about in the history books. Okay, and now briefly about David Carp's fiction. His first book was published in 1952. This is even before I was born. It's called The Big Feeling. I'm trying to find it because I'm turned on to his writing and his whole career. I have to find out everything I can about David Carp. And The Brotherhood of Velvet, which is published before I was born, 1952. The Brotherhood of Velvet, which was made into, years later in 1970, in today's feature film, The Brotherhood of the Bell. Okay. And by the velvet, it means that their pathway has been smoothed by the secret society if you consent to be initiated into it. That's what he means by velvet. It could mean the iron fist within the velvet glove. But anyway, I got to find that book. I saw it on the used market, but it's like $150. So I hope it'll be reissued, like one that I have on order. I'm eagerly anticipating its arrival. And this novel, which was republished a few years ago, was published in 1953, is titled One, O-N-E, One, right? Very briefly, it says it's set in an unspecified time in the future, in an unspecified Americanized country. sounds like social science fiction, right? One depicts a society on its way to a self-proclaimed perfection, which consists in dissension having been rooted out, and every citizen identifying his or her own interests with those of the quote unquote benevolent state. Wow, does that have a familiar ring? And this is back in 1953. Got really, there's more on this, but I have to get into the gist of today's show if I want to keep it under 60 minutes. Good reviews. The Cyril Connolly with the Sunday Times says the publishers have bracketed this knowledge with darkness at noons about fascism. That's Arthur Kessler, by the way. And by the way, Arthur Kessler wrote a really good book called The 13th Tribe, because there's a lot of discussion recently about the Hazars, and more specifically about the Hazarian mafia. And Kessler was one of the first people, he himself was a Jew, right? An assimilated German Jew who wrote about fascism. And he was quite prescient in this book. But this is just an aside. That's the same Arthur Kessler who wrote Darkness at Noon. Required reading, 1984. You already know about that. You know about Brave New World, right? Where Aldous Huxley was laughing at us in previewing what he had in store for us, whereas George Orwell was giving us a premonitory warning, what he had learned as himself a British intelligence agent. Right. Saturday Review says perhaps more terrifying than Orwell's 1984. Says another one, the New York Times, right? Compared to it, most of the utopian writing of the century is mere science fiction. So I'm waiting for this book, one, and I want to learn all I can about Mr. David Carp. He has 2 or 3 or 4, maybe I can't remember, adult children. Hopefully they have his papers or know where they are, unfinished manuscript. But David Carp is worthy of scholarship for people who are interested in film, media history, and the development of American media, right? So let me go into it. And by the way, at an early, just for the people who want to nerd out a little bit, and I'll put this essay in my Patreon site. It's by Professor Georg Simmel. And this was published in the American Journal of Sociology way back in 1906, okay? And the title is The Sociology of Secrecy and of Secret Society. So back in 1906, Georg Simmel was already theorizing it, right? More recently, maybe I'll devote a whole talk to this book. It's called The Roots of Ritual in Prehistory, and the subtitle is Secret Societies and the Origins of Social Complexity. And this is Cambridge University Press, right? So it's a serious matter of academic study now. And I mention that because the issue of secret societies is much too important to leave to conspiratainment and to the pop-up pundits, right? Because the future of our sovereignty as human beings and as humanity under God's natural law it hangs in the balance right now. So I'm not just looking at, on one hand, just as a pure speculative academic exercise, and on the other hand is infotainment or conspiratainment, as we see that's being pandered to the masses by the conspiratorialist on TubeView or the different sites, right? And in fact, I'm going to show you a quite prescient scene from this very movie, The Brotherhood of the Bell, where David Carp is writing about the debasement of America, what now is called tabloid talk television, right? We know about Jerry Springer early when Geraldo Rivera sold out and started to pimp his substantial investigative reporting talents and got into that game. Sally, Jesse, Raphael, all those people are manifestations of what David Carp was seeing probably he was living in Los Angeles at the time, and so was I. And I grew up watching some of these early late night, what is today called by scholars tabloid television. And I remember vividly in the early 60s, the Joe Pyne show, Pyne. He doesn't have much of a presence on TubeView. So if any of you have copies on VHS or whatever, load them up to TubeView so that the American public will understand the genesis of tabloid TV. Yeah, it's funny, and you have quote unquote trailer trash going up there, and and their jeans are hanging down, so you can see their butt crack, and you see women pulling each other's hair extensions and slapping each other, and they always say 3 times at least, you don't know me, you don't know me, you don't know. Okay, you want to know where that comes from? Joe Pine, who himself was a battle-tested World War II veteran in the Pacific theater. In fact, he lost his leg. He had a wooden leg. That's Joe Pine, okay? And you're going to see this Joe Pine figure in the person of the actor William Conrad. Do you remember 70s TV? William Conrad, big giant guy. I think he was starring in a show called Cannon or something like that. I can't remember. It escapes me. It was sort of like a Columbo type detective show. That William Cannon. It'll bring back fond memories of the 1970s, right, along with platform shoes and bell-bottom and polyester clothing. All right. So let's get into this here. And this is about university secrets. It's incredible. And I'm trying to speculate, and that's all I can do. I'm trying to speculate where David Carp got all this information. I think he got it when he was in the Signal Corps. And I bet he hung around with a lot of these OSS characters. And as you know, my audience is above average. You know the backstory, you know the history. You know that back then during World War II, OSS was the White Shoe Boys, the Ivy League boys from guess what? Skull and Bones and Quill and Scroll and all the other secret societies from the elite schools. Carp himself went to City University. His parents were immigrant Jews. He came from a working class origins. I think he sold newspapers and hot dogs and whatever to get by. So, but here he was. He eventually became a high-flying, writer producer in Hollywood, which of course he knew was controlled by the outfit, the syndicate. I'm not talking about just the mafia. I'm talking about the WASP mafia, which is alluded to in the clip here. So I think that's where David Carp got his real education while he was working for the U.S. occupation forces in Japan. I think the U.S. occupation of Japan, I think it ended in 1952. And then the Japanese film industry got restarted. And that was the golden age of Japanese cinema through the 1950s, through the early 60s, and it's since almost disappeared. At least from my perspective. Some theorists, so-called, or historians might disagree. So here we are in a collegiate setting, St. George's College, where the great American actor Glenn Ford, his name is Professor Andrew Patterson, who works for a think tank down in the LA area, Los Angeles area, but he's up in San Francisco for the induction of one of the new members to the secret society, the Brotherhood of the Bell. And he meets with Dean Jagger, who is a financier who drives a Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. His name's Chad Harmon, who is one of the senior members of this Brotherhood. And up to this point, Glenn Ford, although he was a member of the Secret Society, had never been called on to do one of their nefarious tasks. And one of the reasons why I'm showing you this is because this is a warning for people in 2023, especially young people at the elite universities who are being recruited always relentlessly, and you're being observed for induction into these secret societies, so that somewhere down the line, when a new crisis is manufactured, engineered, you're going to go out and say, yeah, I invented this, that, and the other, and I'm on your side, and isn't it a tragedy? There's all these limited hangouts. I won't name their names because I don't want to get sued for $25 million, like Dr. Peter Bregan, a psychiatrist who's for real, and his wife. But you get the idea. This talk that I've given today is germane. It's relevant to 2023. And one of the, I think, chief approaches or prophylaxes in combating these organizations, and they're never going to end. One of the chief arguments here is that secret societies originate from tribal societies. Tribal societies. And Georg Simmel, who I mentioned before, talking about the origins of the sociology of secrecy and of secret societies, he's not condemning them. He says it is a social fact. Deal with it. This is in 1906. And I agree with him. Right. So regardless what President Kennedy said, as we as Americans are, we don't like secret societies. Remember that that famous speech. We do like them. It's not unique to America. They're secrets. It's a universal phenomenon. So as a prophylaxis, my contribution is to dig into the cultural archive to warn potential members that this is going to be your fate if you say yes, if you consent with your own free will to enter into the contract with Lucifer. Right? You're going to have the velvet path laid out for you. You're going to be given a beautiful wife. You're going to be given an incredibly lucrative corporate position, managerial or higher, banking, academia, definitely. I got to see this up firsthand. This story rings very true to my own experiences, and that's why when I heard Eustace Mullins, who I've talked about in a previous talk, just mention it in passing, I got to find this movie. And by the way, thank you. Not by the way, I'm personally thanking my Patreon sponsors for providing the funds that allow me to purchase this film, which I'm now returning to you with value added to the larger public. So thank you, my Patreon people. And I'm going to be posting supplementary material from today's talk on the Patreon site, and also the ending of this film. I'm not going to spoil it for you, but for those on Patreon, I'll put the whole ending for you there. I don't want to leave you in. It's network television, after all. They're not going to really reveal everything and leave us in a dark place. So I'm going to post that later on the Patreon. So here's Professor Andrew Patterson, Dr. Andrew Patterson. He works for a think tank. And you've seen me, if you've been following my work, you've seen me talk about Santa Barbara, right, as the number one location of the Illuminati West Coast, ranging from the Meghan and Harry show to Oprah Winfrey to Ellen DeGeneres, right? I gave a talk on that. She lives in Montecito, which is Santa Barbara County. And I also connected with the earlier settlement, the movement from Chicago under Rockefeller funding, Rockefeller Foundation. We're going to talk about foundations here in a moment. The movement from the Windy City, Chi-Town of Robert Hutchins to sunny Santa Barbara for the Center for the Study of Democratic Institutions. Well, Professor Andrew Patterson works for a similar think tank in this movie, but it's called the Center for the Study of Western Civilization, something innocuous sounding. But again, my gosh, he died in 1999. I wish I was struggling in my career, but if I had been able to sit down and talk with Mr. David Carp, I would have really tried to find out as much as I could about his connection to the U.S. military intelligence, his role in the censorship of Japanese cinema in the 1950s, and his relationship with the OSS people, and then his later career in Hollywood. And as a novelist who was being compared to George Orwell and Aldous Huxley and people like, the dystopian novelists, right? So here we go. He's at a fictional Northern California school. I'm trying to figure out what this campus is. I don't think it's in Northern California. It looks like Southern California, sunlight. I'm guessing it might be Loyola Marymount College. It might be Pomona College. It kind of looks like it has kind of a Spanish, pseudo-Spanish, Southern California, Mexican colonial hacienda type architecture. So here we go. But they call it St. George's College. It's supposed to be set up in San Francisco, which is where, as I've mentioned before, that's where the financial center is. You've got Jane Lathrop Stanford, give a talk on her. And you've got Phoebe Apperson Hearst over at UC Berkeley, total money bags coming out of San Francisco finance, right? Bohemian Club, Bohemian Society, and all that. So he goes up to Northern California to meet with one of the big shots who runs these think tanks. By the way, speaking of Phoebe Hearst and Jane Stanford, I've been invited to be a guest on a major national radio show. I'm going to be on the May 2nd. That's when we're scheduled, which is the day after Beltane. It's the day after Walpurgisnacht, which is April 30th through May 1st. It's a high point of occultic ritual, and I'm not into prediction or anything, but don't be surprised if there's some kind of weird occurrences where some of these people who were involved with the most recent psyops get rolled up, right? Maybe it's going to be some wild, crazy Manson type cults who are, or a transgender serial killer who seemingly at random takes out certain people, and they're going to be these guys who help execute the most recent psyop. That's not a prediction. So anyway, we'll see what happens on Beltane of this year, and I'm going to be on there the day after on May 2nd. I'll give you more information on that later. So I'm looking forward to that. There are people who watch this show along with you, even though my subscriptions are artificially suppressed, who are at very high reaches of media, and I'm sure they're intelligence people who are grateful for my insights, because they don't know their own history, right? I know it because I study it, but they don't know it. They're doing their job. They're compartmentalized. They're very much like Professor Andrew Patterson, right? He thought he made it on his own. He thought he was the product of the American meritocratic society. He didn't realize until it finally hit him, literally, that his father, played by Will Geer, remember Will Geer, Grandpa Walton from the show, The Waltons? That's Will Geer. By the way, he was part of the Mattachine Society, and he was a communist. He was black. I think he might have been blacklisted. He wasn't on TV for a long time. He was part of the gay scene, right? He was one of the founders of the whole homoerotic Boys Town, West LA. Later people like Ed Bucks, it becomes a path of life. Before it was a lifestyle deal, right? It was fairly innocuous, even though there were Luciferians who were involved. I'm not saying Will Geer was, but then it became the devil's playground with people like Adam Schiff and his friend Ed Buck and Ted Lieu of Los Angeles. And I'll leave it at that for now. I mean, everybody knows this. I'm not really saying anything new. So this is the backstory that I'm providing. So here's St. George's College and the great actor, Glenn Ford. I'm sure Glenn Ford knew a lot himself. Those actors back then, a lot of them grew up during the Great Depression and World War II, and a lot of them were in the service. So unlike these desk jockeys, these Harvey Weinstein type twerps who grew up after their forefathers had built, they were the true mensch who built the industry. The cigar chomping, gambling people who bet their own fortunes on movies and empires. Okay, those are the mensch that I admire. That's like American capital. I know there were gangsters. Yeah, I know that. I'm a big boy, though, right? I'm a big boy. I understand that secret societies will never go away. So let's all grow up and be real. But by the time the third, fourth generation come along, they're all decadent. And they're all been filtering into the Disney Corporation. They're all getting rolled up now. And you're going to see some weirdness happening on Walpurgisnacht or Beltane, as the Scottish, the Celtic culture call it. I think I'm going to do a talk on this. For instance, so hang on. And you can tell my talks are more in depth now because I'm not doing the rigid 2 schedule. I can do more of a thorough go through. And I think I'm going to do Jane Mansfield, who was a brilliant woman, by the way, intellectually, right? And Anton LaVey. But I'm going to try to do it in a way that's not cliched, that the conspiratorial people have already done. So don't get turned off by that. I'm going to go way beyond it. I'm sure I'm going to find aspects about her biography, of both of them, that will have not been touched upon by the sensationalists. So I might do that in the run-up to Beltane. I'm trying. I have a number of agenda, and they're all kind of fitting together really nicely. And it's consistent with my larger study of occultism in the American. It's truly Anglo-American, right? Probably French as well, and German, but I'm talking about English language university. By that, Britain and U.S., the Anglo-American University and the occult foundations, and how it has migrated down through the ages to the current situation of transsexuality, which is becoming almost to the point of compulsory, right? In the universities being taught there, right? This is all cultic. This is all Beltane-ish stuff. This is all Wiccan. I had a dean who I went at loggerheads with, who was a professed Wiccan. All right. She was fired or was sent on her merry way before they got me to drop. All my enemies, I managed to slice and dice them, so to speak, intellectually, before I stepped out. You understand? Because knowledge, cultural forensics works. That's how we're going to win. That's by finding people like David Carp, who knew this stuff decades ago. So I'll share with you what I find out in his novel 1. All right. So here we go. Glenn Ford pulling up to good old St. George's College, his old alma mater, right? The mother heart.
Mr. Patterson?
Yes.
I'm Weber, the house proctor.
Yeah. And in 22 years, I'd forgotten how cold it gets up here in the mornings.
There's a fire in the library, Mr. Patterson. You remember the way?
Oh, yes, I do.
If you'll excuse me.
Andy?
Hello, Chad.
Yeah, your hands are cold. What about some tea?
No, thanks.
That's another great actor, Dean Jagger.
Yeah, it's a wild idea, initiation at sunrise, isn't it?
Not so wild. The early brothers sailed on the dawn tide.
Well, they were tough birds in those days.
You're tougher than you give yourself credit for.
Sunrise in a few minutes, gentlemen. Mr. Patterson, Philip Everest Dunning, Mr. Chad Harmon, Mr. Dunning.
Mr. Dunning, the articles and letters of the Brotherhood. Do you swear that having been entrusted with these articles and letters since midnight this night, that you alone read them and did not communicate their content to any person whatsoever?
I so swear.
Having so sworn, are you now prepared to go forward?
I am prepared.
Mr. Dunning, for over 200 years, Brothers of the Bell have been initiated before this bell and in the same ceremony at sunrise. 22 years ago, Mr. Patterson stood due east in your place, and I became his senior, as Mr. Patterson is now yours. One day, Mr. Patterson will stand due south, and he will induct a Brother of the Bell, and you will become senior. See, in this fashion does the Brotherhood express its continuity. It will continue long after all of us are dead. But that continuity depends upon one thing: obedience. Absolute obedience. If and when you are ever called upon by Mr. Patterson to pay your due bill, you must comply, whatever is asked of you. Well, that bill may come due tomorrow, in 20 years, or never. It'll not be a matter of money. It will be an act of fealty, of loyalty to the Brotherhood of the Bell. Now, if you require anything at all, get in touch with your senior, and he will see to it that it's arranged for you. Are you ready for the oath?
I am.
The oath, gentlemen. I, Chad Harmon,
Dunning,
do swear in absolute faith that I shall reveal no secret of the Brotherhood of the Bell, that I shall respect my brothers and myself, that I will act as they desire, secure their interests as if they were my own. And I pledge this,
my honor, my fortune, and my life.
Okay, that's the setup right there. They got the new generation inducted, saying with my, fortune, my honor, and my life. And up to this point, see, Glenn Ford, Professor Andrew Patterson has not been called upon for one of these duties, one of these tasks, even though he joined 22 years beforehand. So he thought the fact that his father became a multimillionaire in the contracting business, that he found a beautiful, intelligent, loving wife, and his academic position at the Center for the Study of Western Civilization, what came because of his brilliance and his native talent and his merit, as I mentioned before. And it all turns out to be a lie. And compounding it, he realized that his wife, well, I'll show you that. I won't spoil it for you, but right now I'll show you the moment where Glenn Ford, just very briefly, is called upon to finally, after 20 years, he's called to blackmail his very good friend and colleague at the think tank in the Los Angeles area, who is a Jewish refugee from probably Hungary or maybe Czechoslovakia, Dr. Konstantin Horváth. He lost his whole family in the Holocaust, and he was maybe paperclip brought to the America in the guise of some sort of anti-communist pipeline and set up with this academic position as a linguist. But now his turn is up, and it's Glenn Ford, Professor Patterson, who's charged with the responsibility of getting rid of Dr. Harvoti. So here we go.
My name is Patterson. I believe I'm expected.
Card?
A card?
This address was written on the back of it.
Oh, yes. Yes.
An assignment from the Bell for you. This has materials which will assist you in the completion of that assignment. Open at any time 1 hour after you've left here.
Andy, I'm delighted you could have lunch with me before leaving. Sit down.
Will you have a drink before luncheon, sir?
No, thank you.
Have a margarita. Paul does it very well. On second thought, perhaps a straight scotch.
Okay, I'm going to move it up to the part where Dr. Harvati, the task is done inadvertently. Glenn Ford is not going to go for it, but circumstances, Dr. Harvati takes circumstances in his own hand.
No, thank you.
Well, yeah, I probably didn't get this part. What happens is Dr. Harvati commits suicide. And of course, Glenn Ford, that's his best friend and colleague, is horrified. He realizes that this is real, but he doesn't know how big and extensive it is. In fact, this Brotherhood of the Bell is so comprehensive in nature that he has an aha moment when he realizes that his own father-in-law is involved with it. And his loyalty to the Brotherhood of the Bell goes beyond his loyalty to his own son-in-law and his own daughter. It turns out he donated his daughter to the professor, right? To Professor Andrew Patterson. And he comes to that Professor Patterson comes to that realization as well. So here's their conversation with his father-in-law, who's played by Maurice Evans, a British actor. His name is Harry Masters in the film. So let's take a look at this pivotal scene.
Hi.
Listen, I gotta talk to you.
Vivian all right?
No, she's fine. She's fine.
Well, why don't you walk around with us?
No, not now.
Okay. Sorry, gentlemen, you'll have to forgive me. Next week, perhaps?
Great.
Now, what is it? Health, money, or a divorce?
No, none of those.
Well, it can't be anything too serious, sir.
What did you do with those papers?
Oh, I have them right here with me. I'm gonna turn them over to the police.
Look, if this fraternity is as big and important as you say, and I'm not doubting you, Andy, believe me, wouldn't you do better to go to the federal government? I mean, rather than some local police department. I have a friend in the Federal Security Service.
No, I hadn't thought about that. No, but you're right.
I have a good idea from time to time.
Listen, Harry, I gotta tell you something. I know that in the past,
Vivian's the baby in our family. I expect she'll go on turning to me when the pressure's on, as she has done since the day her mother died. But I don't want to get in your way, Andy. Truly, I never have wanted that.
You see, I don't blame her, for not trusting me. Because I haven't really been completely truthful about the bell. But you see, now she's got to share the result of whatever happens.
What will happen?
I don't know. I know the Brothers of the Bell will punish me. See, they have unlimited powers.
Forgive me, Andy, I don't think unlimited powers are so easily used these days. Not by governments or organizations. But you wait here. I'll go and call my friend.
Oh, ask him if I can see him this afternoon.
I'll ask. There. My son-in-law, Andrew Patterson. Andy?
And of course, that's a setup. The so-called agent is in on a scam, just like the the father-in-law, right there. He gets the story from a man that trusts him implicitly, but he's probably, he has a British accent, so I'm assuming he's like MI6. He's British intelligence. We're talking about Anglo-American intelligence operation. And British intelligence is far more powerful in Hollywood than the Chinese are, right? The Chinese are still pretty much on the periphery, even though you're going to hear on network news and on even independent media, so-called, that it's the Chakams are responsible for all this, right? But I think David Carp is telling us a different story through the casting and the writing of it. Incredible acting all the way through here. So here's another strategy, and I know this one very well, that if you do not do the bidding of the people who think they control you or do control you with your consent or not your consent, you're not going to get a promotion. You're not going to get tenure. I happened to make it to full professor rank 4 at the University of California because of my sheer productivity. There's very little, but after a certain point, I wasn't getting anything. No grants. I got a Rockefeller fellowship. I had a Fulbright fellowship. I was on the track, okay? But if you do not play ball, right? If you do not keep your work within the certain bounds, and they'll talk to you. They'll invite you up to the golf club, up at the Sequoia Golf Club in the Oakland Hills with a beautiful view of San Francisco Bay. And you see all the founding fathers, their oil portraits on the wall there, and they'll buy you a really nice lunch. And they'll have give you a talking to. They won't really make an explicit offer, but it's if you're smart, you know where they're going with it. It's just that I'm too stupid to pick up on these cues because I'm ghetto. I'm used to fighting for every scrap of bone that I ever get, right? This is beyond my experience of being an insider, right? The Brotherhood of the Velvet or the Bell or whatever it is, right? Freemasons, you name it, secret society. I'm ghetto. So anyway, so what happens, and getting back to the story of academia, what happens is they pull your funding. It's a foundation, right? They get you hooked up, right? But I'm just using him as an example, right? Like say Dr. Robert Malone, because I don't want him to sue me for $25 million that I don't have anyway. But someone, he's like one of probably thousands, maybe tens of thousands of strivers. By the way, he has a biography very similar to these aspirational types like Glenn Ford, probably middle class, lower middle class people, smart, brilliant, strivers row. They're trying to make it in academia, whatever it is, and then the foundations get their hooks in you by giving you all kinds of money, all kinds of grants. You're a rainmaker. You're a big earner for them. But if you go off track, the money disappears. Here's the seminal scene where Glenn Ford realized, oh my gosh, I just shot myself in the foot, and maybe I'll get a shotgun blast to the face if I'm not careful.
I'm sorry that I was so abrupt last night, Andy. We were on the panic button here.
Panic?
The fact is, I was being evasive because I was stalling in the hope that the news would be better.
What are you talking about?
The Ewing Foundation has taken a brutal 20% cut in our funds.
Who's going?
They insisted that we let your department go first.
That's a bit of an overkill, isn't it, considering that I'm the only one they're out to get?
My dear Andy, a normal amount of vanity is essential. I think you're going a little bit far. Trustees of the foundation, unfortunately, are very often arbitrary, but...
I'm the only one they're out to get.
My dear Andy, a normal amount of vanity is essential. I think you're going a little bit far. Trustees of the foundation, unfortunately, are very often arbitrary, but I don't think for 1 minute that they cut our...
I'm going to speed it up here because we're running out of time. This has to be Los Angeles. You can tell by the smog. And I kind of recognize that flying saucer building built into the hillside. I don't know whose mansion that is, but it's not as big as the Getty Mansion over in close to UCLA on the west side. I think this is in the Hollywood Hills someplace where all the old money live. This is where the mansion parties take place, right? And this is the foundation. This is the foundation grounds. The foundation or the Center for the Study of Western Democracies or Western Civilization. And you can see the money was jerked away. So he goes to complain. He still doesn't get it. He complains to his father-in-law, and I'll try to find that scene right now.
What about some hot chocolate, Andy?
Do you realize you've destroyed their lives, their homes, their friendships?
It's really quite good.
Isabel's so callous it really doesn't care.
Now, people generally find a way of mending their lives one way or another.
It really doesn't matter to the Bell, does it? Well, I resigned from the Bell.
No, Andy. You had your option 22 years ago, and you elected to come in. We accepted you, granted you all the benefits of the Brotherhood.
Benefits? I never asked for anything.
Are you truly ignorant of what the Bell has done for you? You know that first bid your father's firm won?
What about it?
A little piece of a big highway.
Yeah?
Won by a small contractor.
That's right.
The start of Patterson Engineering International.
Yes?
The Bell gave your father that contract? Yes. In 22 years, your father has become a multimillionaire, thanks to the Bell. In 22 years, Mike Patterson's company has never lost a bid, a contract, a negotiation. You think that was all good luck? Just brilliance on his part? And you, Andy, you have received every option, every fellowship, every post you've ever wanted.
I competed for them.
If you prefer to believe that.
Look, I know what I earn myself. I know what I owe the Bell, what I don't owe the Bell.
Believe me, Andy, you have never competed for one thing in the past 22 years since you first took the oath at sunrise?
I paid my due bill. Constantine Horvathy is not going to accept the appointment. That was my bill, and I paid it.
But you did break the silence, didn't you?
Well, I'm giving the Bell fair warning. If they try to harm me or my family, I'll break the silence so hard it'll be heard halfway around the world.
No, Andy, you won't be speaking louder and louder. In fact, I am certain we shall be hearing less and less from you as time goes on. Pull!
Yeah. That's his own father-in-law. It's finally dawned on Professor Patterson. I keep forgetting his name, Professor Patterson, that he's deeply into the wet. And it's because he said yes 22 years ago, not fully understanding the implications of his decision. Now we're going to move to a scene where Professor Andrew Patterson, Glenn Ford, goes public, right? Because that's the next step. Go public, sue them, right? These are for the newbies who don't know better and understand how the system is hermetically sealed and stocked with their own people, the judiciary, the police, the media, all of it, right? But he finds out that that this is the reality of his situation. So let's take a very quick look at his attempt to go public.
There is in existence in this country a secret organization known as the Brotherhood of the Bell. I was a member of that organization for 22 years. And as a member, I was ordered to blackmail Professor Constantine Horvathy. An act which I'm ashamed to say I committed. Now, as a result of that blackmail, Professor Horvathy committed suicide. So you see, I was really an accessory to the crime of murder. Now, I accuse as my accomplices Chad Harmon of San Francisco and the Brothers of the Bell.
All right, stand by. Coming up on 2 in 2 seconds. 1, 2. Take it, Q Harold.
Professor Patterson would offer no names except his own and financier Chad Harmon. District Attorney Avery Hazelton was interviewed by Ed Larksburg of the 6 o'clock news.
If the blackmail took place, if Dr. Horvathy's death was a result of such blackmail, we'll present the facts to the grand jury and make a suitable indictment.
But you have Professor Patterson's own confession.
I've been a police officer and a district attorney for many years. Lots of people confess to crimes of which they're not guilty.
Then are you suggesting that Professor Patterson is not responsible for what he is saying?
All I'm saying is that the existence of a super-secret organization, the kind of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant mafia of rich, influential men, is a bit lurid for my taste.
Q Harold.
Meanwhile, in San Francisco, financier Chad Harmon, named by Professor Patterson as co-conspirator in the alleged secret society,
was asked about his alleged connection in the Brothers of the Bell.
But you did attend the College of St. George.
Sure, 40 years ago, one semester. And I am a member of Beta Epsilon Lambda. And I have been in the so-called secret chamber at the Bell. Now, this is a room which contains some priceless antiques. You see, St. George's is one of 18 chapters. And I don't know really what the total membership is.
40,000 members nationally.
Well, anytime 40,000 people can keep it secret for 22 years, I would consider that something of a miracle, wouldn't you?
Professor Patterson does not say that all members of the fraternity are Brothers of the Bell. He claims the Brotherhood is a very small, highly selective secret organization of which you and he are members.
Well, it must be terribly secret because I wasn't even aware I was a member.
Professor Patterson claims that you accompanied him to the Federal Security Service.
I did not. The government will confirm that. I believe they already have.
What did you do when you heard your son-in-law's account of the conspiracy of the Bell?
I consulted with a reputable psychiatrist to discover if Andrew needed help.
Well, at least that part of it is true.
There you go. His own father-in-law is gaslighting him. He's lying. He's going to, and that's a common pattern. They try to get you in to see a so-called therapist or get psychiatric help, because then that's going to be in your book, right? The book that they're keeping on you. It's going to stick with you and follow you throughout any subsequent proceedings. If you're foolish enough to try to take it through the courts and hire a lawyer who's probably in cahoots with the Brotherhood or whoever else, they're bought and paid for. I think the bar. What does the bar stand for? British Associated Registry, something like that. All right, wise up, right? Information, the understanding of the history, cultural forensics, is the prophylaxis to this sort of institutionalized evil, right? Anyway, yeah, they laugh it off. It kind of reminds me the Dean Jagger character, Chad Harmon, the financier, the way he plays in the media. It's kind of like when John Kerry was asked the same question that George Bush was asked by Tim Russer, the journalist. I remember that encounter. He said, "Well, it's so secret, I can't tell you." That was the rehearsed response of both candidates, George Bush and John Kerry, both of them who were skull and bones. And by the way, Tim Russer died of a heart attack not that long after that. So maybe he was like Professor Patterson. No one wrote the memo. Maybe he believed that he got there on his own merit. So we're going to go to the final scene here. We're running a little bit late, and this particular scene is reminiscent of the early days of what now is called tabloid television that I alluded to at the top of its talk of this talk here. Joe Pine and whatnot. It was very especially effective and vibrant. Had huge ratings locally. And these are not network shows. They were like independent stations, Channel 5, KTLA, Channel 13, KCOP in the Los Angeles market that I was watching. Really low budget, low production values. And I finally figured out, thanks to David Carp, decades later, what the function of these shows back then were and what they are today, right? Their latter day counterparts, whether they're headed by Stu, the bounty hunter, Peters, right? I'll call him the auctioneer, and Ben Shapiro or Dinesh D'Souza or any of these people who are out there, Alex Jones, the new Alex Jones. Not the early one was sincere in us. At some point, someone sat him down and had a nice long talk, giving him the facts of life if he didn't already know it. But that's what these shows today, right? And also the pop-up punditry, that's the function they play in obscuring the truth, right? By mocking it and parading a bunch of conspiracy theorists. And most of you know, because I have a good audience, where that phrase comes from, right? So you got the feminists, you got the black nationalists, mowing the flag catchers, right? As Tom Wolfe referred to it. You've got the Jew baiters, or you got the anti-Catholic, anti-papist, anti-Catholic agitators. And the person who's orchestrating it is William Conrad, this Wally George, Joe Pine type host. His name Bart Ehrson. And here he is right now in his greasy, sweaty self. He knows exactly what strings he's pulling here. And Glenn Ford, who is an elite professor who probably doesn't even understand what these shows represent because he's studying Western civilization. He's reading Cicero, right? He's reading the Roman and the Greek classics, and he probably knows ancient Hebrew. He's in the classics. He doesn't stoop so low as to watch this garbage TV, which I grew up watching and probably still watch more than I should. But you'll recognize the pattern. This is in 1970. Here we go.
Well, what have you and Professor Patterson decided, Bob?
Bart, this is a cheap cop-out.
I'm sorry.
I'd sue him for every nickel he's got.
Look, I changed my mind.
Take it easy.
What do you mean, take it easy? I didn't sign anything, did I?
Bob, why don't you sit down and rest your ulcers, huh? now 2.5 hours before showtime. Professor, I want you to tell me why you don't want to appear on my program. And you can level with me. I don't get upset like my producer does.
I came down here and I saw what I was getting into. That's why.
I know I conduct a sideshow, but that's where I get my audiences from. It's my rating. If you watched the show over the last few years, you've seen some very important people have not been afraid to appear with me. A couple of ex-presidents of the United States, some candidates for pretty high office, a Supreme Court justice or two. I will pass over that. I want to tell you something I don't think you realize. Your whole story about the Brothers of the Bell, or whatever you call it, is not newsworthy anymore. The story's pretty well kicked. And nothing new has happened to make anybody sit up and take notice. So if you want attention, you're going to have to be pretty persuasive. You see, the difference now, Professor, is that I don't have to compete with another show for you. You're going to have to convince me that you're worth putting on my show. You know, your father's company's in big trouble. What did the SEC decide about Patterson International stock, Bob?
They've suspended trading, pending the trial for the indictment on income tax fraud.
The word's around that your house is up for sale. Is that true or false?
Yes, I put it up for sale.
And that your wife has left you because she thinks you're a kook?
Well, we're separated. But the reasons are our business, nobody else's.
Professor, you're yelling down a rain barrel. Come on. Here I am trying to convince myself to give you 30 minutes of airtime, which should be worth its weight in platinum to you, so that you can stand up and speak out. Because if you tell the truth, this TV lens will show it. But nothing shows up a phony quicker than this TV lens either, Professor. Now, if you believe in what you say, you can make 1 million people believe it too.
This organization was responsible for the death of Constantine Horvathy. It was responsible for my being dismissed from the Institute. And it was responsible for the indictment against my father, Mike Patterson.
And you persist in these accusations despite the fact that you haven't come up with one shred of evidence,
just
right?
wait a minute now. And as far as the indictment about my father's concerned, there was evidence that there was forgery in some of those documents. There was forgery in some of those documents.
Thank you, Professor. I think we've heard quite enough of your story. And now we're going to open up the forum. Anybody can step down to the little red box and ask any question he likes. We have a gentleman there. All right. Gentleman coming to us. Yes, sir. May we have your name, please?
Chief Wabinzi.
Chief? Oh, chief of what?
In the land from which I was brought, I was of a clan of chiefs.
I beg your pardon, Chief. Do you have a question for Professor Patterson?
No question, but an observation.
The microphone is yours, Chief.
This organization which the gentleman describes is not secret at all. It is well known to every black man, woman, and child.
Is that a fact?
Yes, Mr. Harris. This is the white power structure of the United Racial States of America.
The United what?
Racial or racist, Mr. Harris? There's only one thing that unites the white people in this country, and that is their racism. And the organization which the gentleman describes is well known to us.
Really?
Yes, really, Mr. Harrison. You need not take that sarcastic tone with me.
I beg your pardon. I wouldn't upset you for the world. I'm awfully sorry. Now, I take it that you understand all about the professor's organization, the Brothers of the Bell. Is that correct, sir?
They can call themselves anything they want, but we know essentially what they are. They are the enemies of my people, of my blood. And they have not been a secret to me, Mr. Harris, not for 600 years.
Sit down. All right. Anybody else for the forum? Huh? Ah, here comes a young lady. your name, madam?
Mr. Harris, may I ask a question of your distinguished guest?
Well, certainly you may, but what's your name?
Well, Mr. Harris, for reasons which will become evident to you shortly, I cannot give you my full real name.
Well, we're going to have to call you something now, aren't we, darling?
Could you call me simply a patriot?
Certainly we can. Mrs. Patriot, proceed.
I mean, simply patriot.
Oh, you're not married, huh? All right, simply Patriot, proceed.
Professor Patterson, is it not a fact that your real name is not Andrew Patterson, but Abraham Warsaw?
My name is Andrew Patterson. Now, that's my name.
Of course. I expected you to deny it, Mr. Abraham Warsaw. I have here documentary proof that this man is really named Abraham Warsaw and that he's a Jew.
We're here to ask questions about his organization. Isn't that so?
Well, it certainly does exist. It's an organization of secret international Jewry. Oh, it's been fully described in many books, documented records.
A lot of which I'm sure you picked up in Berlin, huh?
Well, I'm not going to reveal my sources to you, naturally. Well, I mean, after all, these people are out to kill anyone who would expose them. But if you desire, I could give your viewers a post office box in Pasadena where they can get literature that exposes this organization of Jews and their hirelings. It's post office box.
Patriot, that's a no-no. You really wouldn't do a dirty thing like that to a nice town like Pasadena, would you? Dump all that garbage on them? Come on, you don't live there, do you? If you want to give them an address, give them the address of the last kooky farm you were at.
Couldn't they write to me, care of you, Bart?
It costs me money to handle my mail, darling. It would cost me more to handle yours. No, thank you.
I would think you would contribute it as your patriotic American duty, Bart.
Well, I gave at the office last week, dear. Thank you. Step down. All right, quiet down a minute. I want to say something. You want to hear a thought that just occurred to me? I don't think our Professor Patterson is part of a Jewish conspiracy or part of a white power conspiracy. But he is part of a conspiracy. The Brothers of the Bell, I am certain in my mind at this moment, is in fact an underground Catholic organization formed by the secret college of cardinals in Rome, formed to seize political, economic, and religious control of the United States of America. About the bell, all right? We refer to the bell as the Great Bell of St. Peter's in Rome. Therefore, we are not dealing with a Jewish plot or a white power plot, but a Catholic plot.
Well, thank you for your observation, Mr. Harris.
Dum-dums really believe what I just told you? Well, I've got one real opinion anyway. And that is that our friend, the professor, is an idiot. Like all you idiots who stumble down to that stupid red box and proclaim conspiracy everywhere you look. The truth of the matter, Professor, is that you lost your job, your wife ran out on you, your father's company faces financial ruin, and your father had to die to escape a jail sentence. Isn't that right?
All those things are the work of the bell.
Oh, sure they are. Anytime anybody lowers the boom, it's somebody else's fault.
vilifications don't answer any of the points I made.
Somebody's gonna drop the net on you, you creep. I can understand why those meatballs believe in you, because they're sick and ill-educated and stupid, and they haven't got a thing in the world to believe in. But when somebody as well-educated as you, as fat, as protected, as privileged as you are, starts to yell conspiracy, you make me sick. This country gave you everything you ever had, and you ought to get down on your knees and thank God every day of your life, rather than throwing garbage on the flag and the government and the decent people who are trying to do what they can to keep it that
How
way.
much did Harmon and his gang, how much did he have those brothers pay you to do this?
You're making
Or are you a brother
accusations.
too? Did you go to the college of St. George? You answer that question.
Yes, these are accusations you're making. These are accusations. I haven't lost a slander suit yet.
Did you graduate from the college of St. George? Answer that question. You answer that question.
And then it becomes the Jerry Springer show with they all have to be black bouncers who separate the people who are pretending to fight. There you go. This is back in 1970. David Carp, he laid it out for us. So I'm glad that we went through this exercise. We're now at the almost 1 hour and 20 minute point. So I'm going to, 1 hour and 16 minutes. So I'm going to wrap it up now. I think I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll post the conclusion of this film here. It's a television movie. So, of course, the Conrad, he's a great actor. I mean, you got to admit, he's not the role. He's an actor. He is acting. Okay, I don't know what his politics were, but William Conrad was an excellent actor. This whole film has excellent actors in it, despite it having the stigma of television, right? But I'll post the conclusion of it because, after all, it is a network television. It's not going to end on this dismal tone. But there's just enough in there to create doubt in the minds of the viewer in America in 1970 that conspiracy, that this professor lived a privileged life. This is 1970 now. We knew a far lot less than we do today. If nothing else, we've learned an incredible amount over the past 3 years about PSYOPs, thanks to independent writers and researchers who have paid the price, and people from the inside who have come forth and shared with us their experiences, including people who were in the media itself. And more of them are coming forward right as we speak, right? And this is, again, part of the prophylaxis against this complex, this institutionalized complex, so that we, the people, are going to be given some room to breathe. The secret society is not going to go away, but they have to come to an understanding in 2023 that they've overplayed their hand and they need to stand down, because it's not going to end well for anybody. Maybe we'll go down, but so will they. All right. Leave your comments here. If any of you have any personal or professional information on who David Carp is or was, and like I said, I'll be going back to his fiction and study him a little bit more carefully and understand what his politics were. I think he was a solid American. He was a solid American who saw too much and managed to squeeze his message in over the network airwaves, right? Maybe he had help. I don't know. Whether he managed to tread that narrow path between outright censorship and commercial acceptability. So, an interesting document, and we thank again the departed scholar, public intellectual Eustace Mullins for this very important lead on the Brotherhood of the Bell. Ladies and gentlemen, that's my time. It's 1 hour and 20 minutes. Thank you for joining me on this beautiful Sunday. And like I said, we're going to be having some more interesting talks in the near future, God willing. All right. Until then, we'll see you. Bye.